Most diesel engines are designed to last until replacement. The EMD 567 was designed to be taken apart, rebuilt, and put back to work again and again. In yards, on main lines, through decades of snow, heat, dust, and sometimes outright neglect, it kept running. Not because it was perfect, but because it was forgiving in ways that modern engines simply aren't. When Electromotive introduced the 567 engine in 1938, they weren't trying to build the most powerful diesel on the market. They were trying to build one that railroads could actually live with. And in doing so, they created an engine that would power American railroading for over 30 years, with individual units running 40, 50, even 60 years with proper rebuilds. Before we continue, if you think our content is unique and informative, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps support the channel. Also, make sure to share the video with other train fanatics out there. Let's go back to the 1930s because the problem EMD was solving is rarely explained properly. Early diesel locomotives had a miserable track record. The technology existed, but reliability didn't. Engines failed frequently, often catastrophically, and when they did, railroads were stuck. These weren't simple mechanical problems. They were fundamental design issues. Many early diesels were pushed hard to extract maximum horsepower, which meant they operated near their structural limits. High cylinder pressures, tight tolerances, and aggressive power ratings might look good on paper, but they left no room for the realities of railroad service. And those realities were brutal. Railroads in the 1930s didn't have the infrastructure to baby experimental technology. Fuel quality varied wildly depending on where you were in the country. Maintenance was irregular at best, especially on smaller roads. Crews were experienced with steam, not internal combustion, and diesel locomotives were expected to operate continuously under heavy loads, yard switching, freight drags, passenger service, with minimal downtime. When an early diesel failed, it often meant calling in specialists, waiting for parts, or shipping the entire unit back to the manufacturer. That kind of downtime destroyed any cost advantage diesels might have had over steam. Steam locomotives could be fixed almost anywhere with basic tools and boilerplate skills. If diesels couldn't match that kind of field service ability, they had no future. EMD understood this better than their competitors. They weren't just selling engines, they were selling a replacement for steam. And that meant the 567 had to survive in an environment that wasn't ready for precision machinery. It had to tolerate poor fuel, missed oil changes, inexperienced handling, and continuous heavy loading. Most importantly, it had to be fixable by the people who were already working in railroad shops. So, how did EMD approach this? The 567's design philosophy was fundamentally conservative, and that conservatism is what made it exceptional. Start with displacement. Each cylinder displaced 567 cubic inches, 9.29 liters. That's massive compared to many later high-output designs. Larger displacement means you can generate significant power at lower peak pressures and lower RPM. The 567 typically operated between 567 and 835 RPM depending on the application, which is slow by diesel standards. Lower RPM means lower mechanical stresses on every rotating component, bearings, crankshaft, connecting rods. It also means fewer cycles over the engine's lifetime, which directly translates to longer component life. The 567 was a two-stroke engine, which means each cylinder fires once per crankshaft revolution instead of every other revolution like a four-stroke. This isn't just a theoretical distinction. It has real mechanical consequences. Two-stroke engines don't need intake valves. Instead, the 567 used intake ports cut directly into the cylinder liner. As the piston descended, it uncovered these ports, and a blower forced fresh air into the cylinder. This is called uniflow scavenging. Air enters through the ports at the bottom of the cylinder and exits through exhaust valves at the top. No complex valve trains for intake, no cam followers, no push rods. Fewer parts, fewer failure points. The exhaust side did use poppet valves, driven by camshafts, along with unit injectors for fuel delivery. But even here, the design was straightforward and accessible. Mechanics could adjust valve lash, replace injectors, or service cam followers without tearing down half the engine. But perhaps the most important decision EMD made was power density, or rather, the deliberate lack of it. Early 567 models were conservatively rated. The 567A, introduced in 1938, produced about 900 horsepower in a V16 configuration. That's roughly 56 horsepower per cylinder. By the standards of the time, this was not aggressive. EMD wasn't trying to squeeze every possible horsepower out of the engine. They were leaving margin. This is critical to understand. When an engine operates well below its structural limits, everything lasts longer. Bearings don't run as hot. Cylinder pressures stay manageable. Components wear gradually instead of failing suddenly. And when problems do develop, because they always do, the engine gives you warning signs instead of grenading without notice. Over the years, EMD gradually increased power output across different 567 variants. The 567B, introduced in 1940, bumped output to 1,000 horsepower in a V16. The 567C, which became the standard in the 1950s, reached 1,500 horsepower in a VM16 configuration for freight service and 1,750 horsepower for passenger units. But these increases were incremental and carefully tested. EMD never made risky jumps in power that would compromise reliability. There was an unspoken rule guiding all of this. If a railroad mechanic couldn't fix it in the field with reasonable tools and skills, it didn't belong on a locomotive. This wasn't about dumbing down the technology, it was about respecting the reality of where these engines would spend their lives. Now let's talk about what made the 567 different mechanically, because this is where EMD's thinking really shows. The heart of the 567's serviceability was the power assembly. This was a complete cylinder unit, liner, piston, connecting rod, piston pin, all assembled as a single component. When a cylinder developed problems, you didn't tear down the entire engine. You pulled the power assembly out as a unit and dropped in a fresh one. The entire swap could be done in a matter of hours, not days. Think about what this means for uptime. A traditional engine design might require removing the cylinder head, extracting the piston, disconnecting the rod, and then dealing with whatever damage had occurred, often with the engine still mounted in the locomotive. With the 567, you unbolted the power assembly from the top, disconnected it from the crankshaft, and lifted it out. A rebuilt assembly went back in the same way. The engine could be back in service before a conventional design would even have the problem diagnosed. This wasn't just convenient, it fundamentally changed how railroads managed maintenance. Power assemblies became rotating inventory. Shops kept rebuilt units on hand, swapped them in as needed, and rebuilt the removed assemblies at their own pace. Some railroads maintained large stocks of power assemblies, effectively treating them as consumable parts. This is why you'll find records of 567 engines that technically ran for decades but had almost no original internal components left. They'd been rebuilt assembly by assembly, year after year. The crankcase and block design was equally important, though less obvious. EMD built these as massive, rigid castings. The crankcase wasn't just a housing, it was a structural foundation that resisted cracking and distortion under load. This rigidity meant bearing alignment stayed consistent even as components wore. It also meant the block could tolerate imperfect conditions, thermal cycling, vibration, minor contamination, without developing the kind of stress cracks that would total a lighter, more highly stressed design. Bearing design reflected the same philosophy. The 5 and 67 used heavy-duty bearings with generous clearances compared to later high-performance engines. This wasn't sloppiness, it was intentional. Tighter tolerances improve efficiency and reduce friction, but they're also less forgiving. A speck of contamination in a tight tolerance bearing can cause immediate seizure. The 5 and 67's bearings could tolerate a certain amount of wear and contamination before problems became critical. This doesn't mean maintenance didn't matter, it absolutely did, but the consequences of imperfect maintenance weren't always catastrophic. Lubrication and cooling systems were similarly overbuilt for the era. The oil system circulated large volumes of oil with substantial reserve capacity. Oil cooling was generous, keeping temperatures stable even under continuous heavy load. The cooling system used large water jackets and substantial radiator capacity. These systems had margin built in, which meant the engine didn't immediately overheat if something went slightly wrong. All of this adds up to something subtle but crucial. The 567's failures were usually gradual, not sudden. An engine didn't just die without warning. Bearing wear showed up as noise and metal in the oil filters. Overheating gave you high temperature readings before damage occurred. Cylinder problems revealed themselves through loss of power or rough running. The engine communicated its condition, and mechanics learned to read those signals. This gave railroads time to schedule repairs instead of dealing with catastrophic failures in the middle of nowhere. There's another aspect of the 567's longevity that doesn't get discussed enough: operating margin. This is separate from design margin. It's about how the engine actually spent its working life. Railroad service is not constant full-throttle operation. Freight locomotives spend enormous amounts of time idling in yards, waiting for crews, or running at partial power. Even in mainline service, power demands vary constantly depending on grade, train weight, and speed restrictions. Passenger service involved more consistent loading, but still had significant idle time and variable power requirements. The 567 was designed around this reality. It wasn't optimized for continuous peak output. It was optimized for the variable, often moderate loading conditions of actual railroad work. This meant that for much of its operating life, the engine was running well within its capabilities. Cylinder pressures were moderate. Bearing loads were manageable. Thermal stress stayed within comfortable limits. This matters because wear and fatigue are exponential processes. An engine running at 90% of its design limit wears dramatically faster than one running at 70%. The 567 typically operated in that lower region, which meant components accumulated stress and wear much more slowly than the design alone would suggest. The engine also tolerated abuse in ways modern engines don't. If the cooling system ran hot for a while, the 567 didn't immediately suffer permanent damage, it just ran hot until the problem was fixed. If oil changes got skipped, wear increased, but the engine usually kept running. If fuel quality was poor, power dropped and exhaust got dirtier, but catastrophic failure was uncommon. None of this is a recommendation for poor maintenance, but it reflects real-world conditions on railroads that didn't always have perfect shops or unlimited budgets. Modern high-output engines can't do this. Tighter tolerances, higher cylinder pressures, and more aggressive power ratings mean there's less room between normal operation and failure. An overheating event that a 567 would shrug off might warp cylinder heads or crack blocks in a modern engine. Contaminated oil that would just increase wear rates in a 567 might seize bearings in a contemporary design. The engineering is more sophisticated, but also more fragile. The way railroads maintain the 567 also deserves attention, because maintenance culture shaped longevity as much as design. Railroads in the 567 era didn't treat engines as disposable units. They treated them as rebuildable systems. When an engine showed wear or developed problems, the default response wasn't replacement, it was overhaul. Shops pulled engines from service, disassembled them completely, measured and inspected every component, and rebuilt them to specification. Worn parts were replaced, marginal parts were evaluated, and serviceable parts went back in. This field rebuild mentality extended the 567's life enormously. An engine might go through multiple major overhauls over its service life, each time essentially resetting the clock on component wear. Some railroads had systematic rebuild programs where engines cycled through shops on predictable schedules, receiving preventive maintenance before failures occurred. Cannibalization was also common and accepted. If one locomotive needed a power assembly and another unit was down for other reasons, shops pulled the good assembly and swapped it over. This wasn't considered poor practice. It was intelligent parts management. Engines were kept alive as systems, not as individual serial numbered units. The focus was on keeping the fleet operational, not preserving individual engines in original condition. Parts were reused intelligently too. Connecting rods, crankshafts, cylinder liners. If they measured within specification after inspection, they went back into service. This wasn't cutting corners. It was understanding that these components were built with enough margin that wear to the specification limit still left plenty of service life. The result was engines that accumulated truly remarkable service lives. It wasn't unusual for a 567 to run 30 or 40 years in frontline service, then get rebuilt and continue on for another decade or more in secondary service or stationary applications. Some units outlasted multiple rebuild cycles and the locomotives they were originally installed in. You can still find 567 engines operating today in industrial and marine applications, 80-plus years after the design entered production. So, why doesn't anyone build engines like the 567 anymore? The answer isn't nostalgia, it's regulation and economics. Emission standards have fundamentally changed what's possible in diesel engine design. Modern engines must meet strict limits on nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and other emissions. This requires precise fuel injection, high combustion pressures, sophisticated exhaust after treatment, and careful control of air-fuel ratios. The kind of loose tolerances and simple mechanical systems that made the 5 and 67 so durable simply can't meet EPA Tier 4 standards. Fuel efficiency mandates push the same direction. Every railroad wants to minimize fuel consumption per ton mile, which means extracting maximum power from minimum fuel. This drives engineers toward higher compression ratios, turbocharging, intercooling, and other technologies that increase thermal efficiency. All of these technologies add complexity and reduce the kind of operating margin the 567 enjoyed. Manufacturing economics matter too. The 567 was expensive to build by modern standards. Those massive castings, heavy bearings, and generous material sections cost money and weight. Modern engines use lighter materials, more complex geometries, and computer-optimized designs to minimize weight and cost. A modern engine produces more horsepower per pound and per dollar than the 5 and 67 ever could. But something was lost in this evolution. The 567's forgiveness, its ability to tolerate imperfect conditions and keep running, doesn't exist in modern designs. Field repairability has declined as engines become more integrated and complex. You can't just pull a power assembly from a modern locomotive engine in a small-town shop. Mechanical honesty, the way the 5 and 67 communicated its condition through noise, vibration, and performance, has been replaced by sensors and diagnostic codes. The EMD 567 represents an era when reliability and serviceability were prioritized over peak efficiency. That's not a value judgment, it's a reflection of different priorities. Railroads in 1938 needed engines they could fix and keep running. Railroads today need engines that meet emission standards and minimize operating costs. Both approaches make sense in their context. The EMD 567 didn't survive because it was immortal. It survived because it was allowed to be imperfect and fixed. That design philosophy, more than any single technical feature, is what made it nearly impossible to kill.